Hello, my name is Janie Fulling. Today's date is March 27th, 2015, and I am interviewing Dr. Maude Jennings on the Ball State campus as part of the Ball State University African American Alumni Oral History Project. It's good to have you here today, Dr. Jennings.
I'm so pleased to be here.
Could you just start by telling me when and where you were born?
Let me see now. It was 100 years ago in Harlem Hospital in New York City. In October, my parents, if you need to know anything about them, were from the West Indies. And so I came, I'm a first-generation American, if that has any bearing on the question.
Yeah. How did your parents come from the West Indies?
They migrated. One my father came because he wanted to teach. My mother was a homemaker. She had had two children. She was a widow, and she emigrated to Canada and then to the United States. And so that's how that happened. They met, and there's another story, but you're too young to hear.
What were their names?
My father's name was Lancelot Oliver James. My mother's name was Alice Walker.
And what were they like during your childhood?
My father was semi-absent. My mother was an unhappy woman, but available. She had had two children, but she'd been married before in the West Indies. Her husband had died. She emigrated with the children to America. And that's a story I don't know if you're old enough to hear, but I suspect that it may not be appropriate at this time. You're too young.
Okay. So the children that your mother brought over with the West Indies, were they raised as your brothers and sisters? Yes. When you were growing up?
As a matter of fact, my brother has just celebrated his 101st birthday.
Wow.
And I'm not far behind.
So what was your growing up like in New York?
In New York, probably you would say it was ghettoized. We lived in Harlem, and all the things about people living in a certain section of the city applied. You didn't go too far away into other areas. I didn't get into downtown New York until I graduated from high school, as a matter of fact. The thing that probably brought the world to me were the librarians at the Schomburg Library. And these women, to this day, that library becomes the place of perhaps my birth, so that, or my intellectual birth, let's put it that way. And that was where I got to meet people like Langston Hughes.
At the library?
At the library.
Wow. So what sort of other opportunities did you get through being at the library?
The reading, I think, did a great deal to spur whatever intellectual abilities might have been there. But then my father was a language snob too, you see, so of course that, you may have noticed, that applies here. Because of the language, I was able to go to a high school that was quite unusual in the city, the High School of Music and Art, not only for language skills, but I used to like to draw, and I got scholarships afterwards. But that was an unusual high school in that it became the model for a television show called Fame. And I majored in art and and minored in music, so that added a great deal to the experiences that made me what I am today. As a matter of fact, one of the other things it did was widen my concept of the world, because I went to the high school in 1940, about the time that the World War II was beginning, and had a great many young people there who were, how do I want to say, emigres. They had to leave, parents had to leave Europe, and so of course this was that kind of school, beautifully integrated, and exposed me to a civilization of which I knew nothing.
So your school then, your high school was integrated with all different races and ethnicities. Did you ever experience any discrimination throughout your high school or earlier?
I think it was once I had to do a preparation for an art class, and I was not, how do I want to say this, articulate, not as articulate then as I am now, you understand. But the principal came, and I had heard, while I'm making the presentation, somebody was tittering in the back, and I said something about, oh, please, nothing from the peanut gallery, and he was there. I don't think he received it too well, because I noticed a little hauteur as he was leaving the classroom. I survived.
So you went to a high school of art and music. So how did those impact you as a student?
It provided me with a wealth of information that was not typical of high schools at the time. How do I want to say this? The programs were so much more on a college level than many high schools in the city. As a matter of fact, now that you mention it and cause me to remember things, you know I'm old, we had programs that prepared us for sophomore years in college rather than freshmen in college. So it was that kind of advanced study thing.
Right, sort of like a college preparatory type of school. Tell me a little more about your community that you grew up in throughout high school, throughout your middle school years, the community you lived in.
Public schools in New York City and those in Harlem were not integrated to the degree that they are now. I did not really understand integration until I went to high school, which is a kind of culture shock all of a sudden. I was 12 when I went to high school, so of course this made a lot of learning had to occur very quickly. Hence that perhaps inelegant remark in front of the principal. It was, as I mentioned, segregated. It was all black with no real, how do I want to say this, difficulties. There were classes, however, and there were the Strivers' Row. It's something you may hear about sometime if you're studying Harlem history. This was a row of people, doctors, lawyers, people who had achieved certain professional status, who lived on a certain street. I was fortunate not to live in one of the most, how do I want to say this, most ghettoized areas. We lived just across the street from the hospital, so of course that area was reasonably well kept. I had a job at that hospital. After school, I used to come pass water, fill the water jugs and wash the dishes and things like that in the postpartum section of the hospital. And that's why I am able to collect Social Security now. You see, I've been working since I was about 11 years old, so there it is.
Wow.
Can't you tell? Look at these hands.
You said you started high school at 12, and then you started college, I think, at 16. How did that come about?
I got a scholarship in art. Now, I had mentioned to you that my father was semi-absent, and this began a series of events that have colored my existence to this day. He wanted me to be a doctor. At 16, what did I know? So I had gotten art scholarship to Hampton University. I went down and tried to study science when art was my love, and found out that my father had neglected to pay any bills, since I had to give up the scholarship in art, which would have taken care of the bills. He had not paid any bills, and I discovered this in April of 1945. It was a very traumatic April, because at the same time that I discovered I was not officially registered at the college, Franklin Roosevelt died. And so there I am. Everything, the world that I knew was collapsing all around me. So I went back home, and we had quite a discussion about paying for college. I didn't want to go back to Hampton. I tried Wilberforce, and I remember this to this day, if you can't afford it, please let me know. I can stay here and go to school. No, go study, I want you to be a doctor. And the same thing happened at Wilberforce.
The same thing?
No bills, no money, no nothing. And so you see, I told you he was semi-absent.
Semi-absent.
Anyhow, what else?
So what was your relationship with your father like after that?
I did not speak to him again, ever.
Really? Wow. So what were your experiences like at Hampton and Wilberforce? I know you were only there for 1 year each, but...
At Hampton, I learned a great deal about Black society and how upper-class Black people behaved. I did not know that before. It was a very interesting, how do I want to say this? You know, how do you, like a child who had never been exposed to anything before, even little things like table manners, I had to learn, by watching other people, because it was, well, there was no such thing as family dinners, except maybe things like Thanksgiving. You didn't sit down with family to eat. So, of course, the elbows on the table and all of that stuff. I am so, how do I want to say this? So cultivated now, it frightens me. People, you know, they watch me eat now. So, of course, I suppose everything comes around full circle, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Anyhow, that was it. Wilberforce was rather interesting because I met a woman there who was a professor. She was a Native American and African, and a brilliant woman who was quite understanding. It was then that I began to realize, hey, there's something to organic chemistry after all, and I finally figured that out. It was also there that I met my husband, who was a student. And I suppose, since truth, I'm going to tell the truth and shame the devil, I was looking for a father substitute. There it was, and married him. We lived together for 12 years. I got him through school, and then he saw to it that I got through nursing school, although he didn't have much to do with it. I got a scholarship, my whole nursing experience, and that was interesting. I spent 25 years as a nurse and paid $50 for the whole thing. That scholarships again. You see, without scholarships, my whole life would have been ruined. You understand that? It would not even have existed. So he was teaching in Virginia. I was working as a nurse in Washington, D.C. after, this is about 1955, 56. He had a pulmonary embolus and died in 1960. And I have been a merry widow ever since.
Wow. What was his name?
William Jennings.
William.
I've not changed my name.
What was your relationship like then?
Not good.
Not good. Okay. So, tell me a little bit about nursing school then.
Fun, interesting, and as close to the science that my father wanted me to become. Although I did rather well with visiting nursing, had the most interesting patients. There was a man named John Gotti who had been in the Spanish Civil War and flew airplanes and had a terrible accident in which he was turning the propeller and didn't move his fingers fast enough and lost tips of them. He wound up having a disease called Maurice Strumpel's disease, which paralyzed him as far as his spine was concerned. And I used to go and help him bathe. He devised a series of straps that would allow him to move around in his bed so that he could change position. And John and I had wonderful, wonderful conversations about things. And he was the most outstanding patient that I recall. And then I did, because I had worked at hospitals, you know, I told you since I was 11, I'd always done operating room work because they needed people to do things. And so I became more an OR specialist. I wound up being an assistant director of nurses at the Washington Hospital Center in Washington, D.C. This was when he was teaching, and we had relocated from Ohio to Washington.
Mm-hmm. So when you were working then in these healthcare positions, you said you started as a staff nurse in Washington, D.C. and then moved up to a more managerial position. Mm-hmm. Which did you prefer? The manager,
naturally. Telling other people where to go is always fun. And I got, it was great. It was more challenging, I think. Yes, of course, being a staff nurse is wonderful, and you can do so many wonderful things to help people. But I like helping the helpers. I think that does more. I could influence more people that way, I think, and perhaps contribute more to the general welfare than the other thing, the other way.
Yes. And does that affect the way that you relate to other people today?
Quite possibly. That as the seed is bent, so grows the tree. This is one of the reasons that I am so interested in trying to see to it that children know how to read. Children are not deprived of creative experiences. I heard just this morning about a young man who did not read well, but whose grandmother urged him to develop his thought processes and to create. And so often this kind of thing is what affects my relationships with young people today.
Right.
Stunt you. All right, take a minute.
I'm just thinking, sorry. So can you tell me any more about your experiences with nursing? Like, what would you like people to know about your experiences as a nurse or as an assistant director of nurses? That
sometimes nursing requires more than just the scientific well, of course, I mean, this is the thing they tell you, the nurse is a teacher. And we need to emphasize that so that people begin to realize this is a resource person, this individual can help me. The other thing I want to know is something that's been in the paper lately, that male nurses make $5,000 at least, more than female nurses, and they got some nerve, because it was a profession before that men looked down on, and only as they have advertised it and perhaps glamorized it more and provided the incentive of money, that more men are involved with it. As a feminist, this does not sit well, you understand. I know that because I've done my share of lifting, and I can understand why they think that that's... But you see, I came into nursing at a time when people in the sanitation department, garbage men, made more money than nurses. So you see it's a sore spot. It doesn't sit too well.
Yeah.
Nursing, what do I want them to know about it? That it provides a way to understand humanity. This is my latest kick, is that why are we so inhumane to each other? And I read something just recently that describes it, that says that quite possibly these are tribal instincts. And it's hard, you know, man, here we've been looking at each other, but for 25,000 years at least, eye to eye. And how come we still have this fear of somebody different than you? Why does this happen? Why do we continue to annoy and abuse each other? I'm looking for answers. I just recently took a quiz on Facebook. You ready for this? You should never have asked me all these questions. But I took this quiz on Facebook that says, how many times have you been here? And I have been here 427 times, reincarnated. Christ. 500,000 times and the same things keep happening? I don't understand this. What's the purpose of it all? Anyhow, just to show you how not unwell I am.
Well, have you reached any conclusions?
Have I reached any conclusions?
Yeah.
I keep thinking that perhaps in every little way, and maybe I have to come back 500,000 times again to make changes. But you know, I suppose if you can change one child, and I may have changed a couple of children. I get Facebook responses. Hey, I remember you. One of those things. So that's it. Let's get serious then.
All right. So you went to Manhattanville College in 1975 then. So you had been in the medical profession for half of your life, and then you pursued a Bachelor of Arts in English.
There's a bit of drama associated with that, because I was in the operating room and had a deaf patient, and the man had an aneurysm, an outcropping of his aorta. It bulged out and it could have burst. He's deaf. I'm in the operating room with a mask on. He cannot hear me, and he can't make signs. We get him all done. We remove the aneurysm and put a patch in place and get him back to where he has to be, to living, except that the patch is not well put on by the doctor. It blows, and the man dies. And I realize at that point, I have to speak. I've got to use words. I've got to use language to try to make some difference. Because that was the only patient in 25 years of nursing, the only one that ever died. And you can see what kind of an impression it made, and certainly because of the lack of communication. So.
As a child, you said, or when you were, I think, 11, you said you worked in a hospital and you dealt with postpartum people.
Patients.
Yes, patients. So where was the disconnect there?
No, not disconnect, really. Now that you're stirring up all kinds of memories. Worked in the operating room in the summer because I could do that more often, and it was really a matter of just cleaning instruments and things like that. After school, with the patients postpartum, oh, how wonderful! Here come mommy and babies, and it was that kind of thing. There, I'd be passing the water and serving trays for dinner and things like that. It was also during that time that I met a lady named, whose last name was Bearden, Bessie Bearden. And she talked to me about trying to do more than just this little job after school. Her son was the artist, Romar Bearden, who was another one of those wonderful people from the Harlem Renaissance. You may look him up. His work rather resembles the work of Jacob Lawrence, somebody else you need to look up as far as art is concerned. But here was this woman who saw perhaps a potential in a child and realized, go to school. Don't let this be the end of what it is you do.
So did that have any influence on you, you pursuing the arts?
Definitely.
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 So then back to Manhattanville then. So you started pursuing English because language was important.
Yeah. And isn't that interesting that there were wonderful people there who allowed me to be as as how do I want to say this, vociferous. Because again, I'm the one student. No other black kids in the class. This always astounds me that I become the token. I had this tremendous experience with a teacher who allowed me to interpret Walt Whitman's When I Heard the Learned Astronomer. And apparently perhaps it was because I was older, my interpretation of it grabbed her interest. And so it began this relationship with language.
And was this your first year?
This was the first time going back after all of those failed attempts, and so of course I was able to continue to graduation. It allowed me some credit for those earlier years, and probably for work experience as well.
Mm-hmm. So you said it always astounded you that you became like the token. How did that affect
I'm
you?
the only black person in the classes at Manhattanville. I am the only black person out here in a lot of the classes at Ball State. They were looking at the time for African Americans to fulfill, what is that thing anymore? I can't remember.
Affirmative action?
Oh God, it's been so long, you see, and I've forgotten all of affirmative action. So here I am again, the token. And again, token, I think it may well have been the beginning, because you now have, I think, 2 or 3 other people who are on staff. As in drama, I know that Dwandra Lampkin, and there was a young man from Africa who was, anyhow, trailblazing, you see, it happens all the time. I just can't help it.
So then in your classes at Manhattanville, as the only black student, did that affect the way that your classmates saw you?
I was working and going to school, so I didn't have a whole lot of social time with them, you see. And besides, I was in my 40s when I was doing that, so the age difference, of course, did not enhance relationships. Mm-hmm. You know, I go to class, what do they call them? Older students. Jesus, it's been so long. Older students who returned to school. You know, I'm a grandmother type, and here I am with all these kids who know nothing about life, which is why when I heard the learned astronomer meant so much to the professor, because somebody he could talk to like
right.
that.
So you had a job then while you were there. Mm-hmm. What did you do?
I was again in the operating room. I was working at a hospital in God, it was north of Stamford. I can't remember the city now. And I went to school, went to work, went to school, went to work.
Okay. So it sounds like you didn't have a whole lot of relationships with your classmates at that time. You know, where did you foster any friendships?
Oh no, not at Manhattanville. I didn't know anybody there. You see, I was there primarily to go to school, get the degree, and get out. I had planned to leave the area and go to California, but I had dear friends with whom I had fostered some really close relationships. Now, here's another. You ready for another tangent of my life? While I was an operating room director in Washington, the company Pfizer had an instrument offshoot called Codman and Shurtleff, and we used their instruments because of the neurosurgical aspect, or the neurosurgical department. They were the best people to provide it. Their delivery service, however, was terrible, and I used to complain, being, you know, the authoritarian that I was. And they sent down representatives. One was a man named John Sheehan. John Sheehan was the vice president of sales at Pfizer. And he decided, well, why don't you come up and see the factory and figure out what ways we can help? So The interesting thing is that the day that I was to go up was the day that Bobby Kennedy got shot in California, so that it becomes memorable for many reasons. I go up to Boston, I make the tour, I suggest some things that they could do to change, and the day is done. I'm ready to come back to Washington. He suggests, oh, come on out to the house and have a swim. I didn't bring my bathing suit. Oh, come on. I didn't shave my legs. Oh, come on. So he calls his wife and he tells him, Marge, I'm bringing an operating room supervisor home. This is the first day that Boston has had any warmth, kind of like now, had any warmth, and she's at the pool with a friend named Helena O'Sullivan. And Marge says, can't you take her out to dinner someplace? Go away. This is the first day. No, she's hot and tired. So we get there. And I'm very cool about, I am, God, I'm so world weary. I give her the dishwasher handshake and stuff like that. She's raising her eyebrows. And it's really getting to be very warm. Well, how about putting on a swimsuit and taking a dip? And I gave her the usual, I didn't shave my legs excuse. Oh no, come on. And she had, I don't have a suit. She says, here's some that the nuns wear, and it's a two-piecer, and it's a zip up in the back. This shoulder has always been very stiff, and it's worse now. So I'm in the bathroom, and I'm in the bathroom, and I'm in the bathroom, and is there something I can do to help? I can't get the zipper up. Oh, the nuns have trouble with that all the time, so she puts one foot on my butt. We were friends for the rest of their lives. I got to meet all the, as a matter of fact, the children, and I still communicate, and I'm going to their weddings, the 2 weddings that are happening in the fall. I was adopted by them. They became my godparents, and it was a wonderful, wonderful relationship. We even went to the Jubilee year in Rome, 2000, to see the Pope and to see Rome, to see Italy. And it's been a wonderful, rewarding experience. Now, interesting, because here is an Irish family adopting a black child. And I'm beginning to see more and more connections ethnically there than many people would realize. So it's my life, I tell you, I mean, maybe this is one of the reasons I keep coming back. 500,000 times.
So what kind of relationships do you see between Irish and Black?
Similar in the fact that they too have been rejected and despised and abused, and in many ways people have tried to decimate them. The sad thing is that sometimes, again, it's that business of needing somebody to look down on, and so there's that kind of relationship that may occur. I have been fortunate in not having had too much of that. But when it happened, gee, what a surprise. It's shocking. Really, it is. Oh, I didn't think that. I forgot about that. Isn't that wonderful to be able to forget that rather than to have to live with it all the time?
Mm-hmm. So you said that they sort of adopted you as your own as their child. When did that happen? What year was that?
That happened about 2 years after I would come up to visit with all of them, and they asked me if they could be my godparents, and so there was that. I became a Catholic at the time, and because I'm going through a religious turmoil right now myself, but I'm an advocate of Francis. I think he's the coolest thing that happened to the church in 100,000 years, and like that. The children and I was there when the 2 youngest were home. And the young boy, Danny, who is now about 40 years old, asked me, what makes your skin so brown? Just to show you how kids innocently. And my comment was, it was because I drink a lot of coffee, so you watch out. One of those things. And he always remembers to this day, how could you do that to me? And it was fun. And the kids accepting me as part of the family, no question. Okay, this is Maude, she's here. And even now, as I mentioned, I have weddings of their grandchildren to go to.
Right.
It's going to be a hot thing. They were within 2 weeks of each other, and both on the East Coast. It's going to be fun.
That would be fun. So how old were you then when that
Oh,
happened?
Christ. I'm like 40, I suppose. I can't remember. It's, I'm old. I keep telling you. I think it was, I was 40 thereabouts. I guess.
Okay. So after that, did you ever refer to them sort of as your family, as your parents, as your siblings?
Really, I mean, they really were more like siblings. Margot and Jack, I mean, the elder ones. The children, I still communicate with the family, the kids, because I used to take Nancy and I spent Christmas with Nancy and her children, and her children's children. So it's been like that. I am destined to spend Christmases because you cannot spend Christmas alone again. One of those things. It's going to be that kind of family.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Is there anything else you would like to say?
Don't you
about them?
have enough? My God, I've been talking for 2 years. How many? Oh Lord, it's almost time. What else?
All right. So let's see. You started pursuing your master's degree at Ball State after you graduated from Manhattanville. What brought you to Muncie?
The Affirmative Action program. You caused me to think about all these things. My professor at Manhattanville had recommended me to Brown, and Brown at the time had no room at the inn. So the next best thing was to come to Ball State. Came out here in 1978 and had a terrible automobile accident in 79. Both legs were broken. And that threw everything. I had only planned to be here for a year because I was going to dash away. But there were so many dear people who helped me, notably Francis Rippey and Darrell Adrian. Notably, there were several others, but those two were extremely kind and understanding. And I say kind and understanding because there was still so many aspects of me as an academic, as a developed human adult that needed, let's say they were rough edges, very rough edges, and they needed a great deal of smoothing and awareness and understanding and compassion, because without that, I might not have been as well received or as kindly received.
Okay. So, let me see. Tell me a little more about your experiences as a master's degree student at Ball State then.
Well, I'm trying to remember this. I think I had, that was when I met Betty Newcomb, who was with Human Resources and the Affirmative Action program here. And she made me an activist and aware, and much more aware of what was going on politically in the university. how do I want to say this? The master's program, as I mentioned, was interrupted because of the accident, and I was out for about 6 months and had to redo, get back into the game again. And again, it was because of I get by with the kindness of strangers. You know, Blanche Dubois. What would I do without the kindness of strangers? Not much. I met Tom Thornburg then. Thomas Thornburg, who guided me through the master's and the Ph.D. And a poor man, radical himself, a very radical, and we still communicate. His wife and I are close friends.
So it sounds like it was almost the people that kept you in Muncie.
It was. If it had not been, as I mentioned, for the strangers and their kindness, couldn't have done it.
Do you pass that on to other people now?
I try. I mean, what do I do? I'm right now involved with the program at Longfellow where you teach these kids to read. And I got them involved in readers' theater because that was something, look, that's something I learned here. Read double reason. If they read and they can act and they can do all kinds of other little things that they hadn't thought about. And it turns out that it works rather well. I want them to appreciate what books can do in the same way that I was taught, that these things are magical and that your life can turn around. And perhaps just with conversation sometimes with kids, because they may have parents who don't talk to them. And if you ever notice conversations you had with your mother or parents or anybody, grandparents, can affect your thinking and change ways that you had not realized were possible before. That's something to do. Those are the things that I want to do. Those are the things that still drive me. And grand causes, of course. Right now I'm involved with AAUW and its hunger program and trying to get an op-ed piece together. Oh my God, you have no, all those things that I learned back then now suddenly come into play. I have to be able to make a legitimate argument and one that will appeal to people. I know now. The degree says rhetoric and composition. Oh, okay. Let's do something about that.
So, let's see. You mentioned earlier about Betty Newcomb and how she turned you into an activist while you were here. Some sources have referred to Ball State historically as an island community, sort of saying that its students like to stay more cut off from the world. Did you notice that when you were here, or did you see more activism?
No, she was perhaps a beacon. There is a great division between the town and the gown. It is not something that I noticed at other universities. There is this separation. Now, the thing that may be easing it somewhat is Pat Clark and the immersive learning program that is involved here. That there is a greater appreciation of some place like Whiteley. I don't know enough about other areas in town to say that there are things that we need to do. I do think that it's not so much the university that fails in its effort to be more involved with the community. I think sometimes the people themselves may, you stop to think about the, how do I want to say this, the intellectual level of the people who came here. They were workers. They were looking for jobs. It was a I don't know how to describe it other than to suggest that they were people who got their fingernails dirty. And then you have this other class division. That's perhaps what I'm thinking. And so, of course, there's this this tribal thing. You can't become part of me because you're one of them, and vice versa. And this is perhaps something that happens. As a black woman, this is definitely something, because so often they do not feel connected at all. You're white. What different? I can't, and so many people in Muncie come from areas where there has been this sort of separation, so that there is not a whole lot of conjoining.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And did you notice that, like, as you started teaching here?
A little. But how obstreperous I am. I mean, I had the nerve to want to teach humanities with a black perspective, and of course, I don't know how well that got over, but I had fun.
Mm-hmm. So, what were your Ph.D. dissertations and your master's theses about?
I don't remember what I did for the master's. It's it's been 100 years, but the dissertation was on Gerard Manley Hopkins and how he, as a poet, responded to his life and times, the poetics and prosody of Gerard Manley Hopkins, a Catholic, and at the time I was in the fervor of Catholicism, who was misunderstood because he spoke differently in his poetry, and concerned himself with people that would not ordinarily be considered poetic material. Perhaps an activist of a sort. I didn't realize it until just now that, we were perfectly suited at the time. I didn't realize all of these things, except as you make me reflect.
So at the time you just chose him because...
Really, he was foisted off me. I think it was because of, perhaps, I'm trying to remember the poem. Thou art indeed just, Lord, if I contend with thee, but so what I contend is also just. And it's the argument that he was having with God that I am currently having with God right now. So these things are more fortuitous than one would imagine. Mm-hmm. So there it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you said something about how he, related with people who would not be considered poetic. And I know you've talked a lot about your relationships with people. Do you see any similarities there?
Of course. The children, for instance, who have no concept of poetry, mm-hmm. who don't know, who have not been exposed to, books, music, art. None of those things have entered their lives, except as some people from the outside bring them in. I find on occasion even the teachers are not as receptive to wider worlds. I mentioned the child this morning whose grandmother urged him, you don't have to read, you can create. Reading is an important thing, but it is not the only thing. These are aspects of child's development that I wish more people had, that, help kids find ways to express themselves, to be all they can be, if that does anything.
As a teacher, how do you do that with both young children now and then when you were at Ball State teaching college students?
How do I do that? I listen to the kids. I listen and I suggest and I encourage and occasionally, look at this. Offer examples, I suppose. All you can do is open the door. At least for me, all I can do is I open the door. You want to walk, we can walk through together. Maybe you want to walk through by yourself. Don't be afraid to walk, though. Oh, I know it sounds so Pollyannish. Sorry.
No, it sounds good.
Okay, what else?
So, have you seen the impact then that you've had on these children?
I have heard, as I mentioned, from some of my kids who are happy that they had the experience. Of course, you send them out into the world and they go off and they do things. And if I can't remember the names of some of my professors, I mean, what am I expecting? But when occasions arise, every now and again, I get a message from somebody, hey, thank you. And that means, just recently I got one from a kid that I had evidently sponsored at Golden Key, and he said thank you. So, even how many years has it been since I've been involved with that? Like another 100, but there it is.
So what all things are you involved in the community now that you've retired from Ball State?
I mentioned to you the reading clubs at Longfellow. I am currently trying to help people understand things with the League of Women Voters. Incidentally, ladies, if you're interested, you might want to think about it for your future. The dam is the latest thing that affects the area, and so of course the League has taken a stand against that. I'm also involved in a program April 11th at the YWCA. You all come at 10 o'clock. We're going to talk about hunger, and I got to get the posters and a piece for the newspaper out. What else? My dance card keeps filling up. I just have so many things to do.
What keeps you so involved in Muncie affairs?
It's getting to be very difficult to stay involved with stuff in Indiana. The latest thing that the Religious Freedom Bill is, to me, the next thing I expect the ducking stools, so that everybody will, they're going to put me in one of them right away, so that I'll find out whether I'm a witch or not. You all remember, it reminds me of Arthur Miller's play, The Crucible, and the people accuse each other of witchcraft. And so I know this quite possibly is taking it to an extreme, but it does seem to me a little bit, how do I want to say this, 17th century. This was, my favorite thing is, this is not liberty and justice for all. This is not we the people. This is not what the country was founded on, you see. And it all goes back to those lessons that I learned so completely as a child, that this was America. And it does not begin to seem like that. But then you see I'm a radical. What else?
Well, you've so far talked about your activism, and it seems as if you believe that you can change things.
I keep trying, but that's why I'm got 427,000 times. It could be 428,000 times.
So I guess I'd like to ask how you would describe the community of Muncie. I know you said it's getting harder to stay involved in Indiana matters with like the Religious Freedom Bill, and I know there's been some other controversies. Like, how would you describe the community and race relations?
I belong also to a group called RACE, which is making an attempt to have conversation. I have encouraged, yes, conversation, but what are we going to do? You see, that's probably the activist in me coming out. That it cannot be just conversation. Yes, we can finally talk ourselves into understanding what privilege is, what descriptive terms can do. Why do children have to have the talk? What do you do about it? How do you change that kind of thinking? How do you encourage people to look each other in the eye and recognize your humanity, my humanity? How do we do that? That tribal thing I was telling you about.
Right.
How does that, is it possible to break it down? Can it be reformed?
Is it?
Anyway, you know.
What do you think?
There are lifetimes of experiences that people have to tear apart, look at. I keep trying to do it myself, and perhaps you may have noticed some of it in my discussion. How many other people are willing to look at themselves and say, oh, this is something I need to change. This is a thought I have had because my parents gave it to me. The recent apology by the young man at the University of Oklahoma, controversy both ways, people saying, yeah, it's about time, and he was right, and others saying, well, you know, this is too late, that it came with him from birth. You see, there are those attitudes that parents can instill in children, and this was one of the reasons I suspect that he felt no compunction about singing this racist song. The other comments were that, look at all the black people around him, and they were saying they would be in Uncle Tom's. I suppose he had to do it in a black church and with a black setting to receive some sort of acknowledgement that this was a most unwise thing to have done. It would have been better had there been an integrated audience behind him. Maybe his parents had come to recognize that, oh, this is my child, and this is what he. There's so many. How do I want to say this? Little things that you need to be aware of when you're going through a situation like that. And that's probably not what you asked me in the beginning. I wandered, but it does. That may. What do I want to do? I want people to see me in all my glory and in all my shame as a person. What do I want other people to do, to see them, to allow me to accept you with all your glory and all your shame? I think of the terms that get applied to people without even realizing it. I'm coming across the street to the building. A white student and a black student passed by. This is a small town. The white student looked the other way. The black student smiled and said, good morning. Why is that? Is it because you didn't know me? Is it because you wouldn't acknowledge me? Or, you know, why? What happened? Why did you not look up and say, good morning? Something like, or I'm on a college campus. What am I going to do to you? Of course, I could take the cane, but then that wouldn't have been polite. Anyway, it little things like that, the kind of recognition of my humanity, the black child, perhaps because I'm old, may have had that kind of, but she looked up, looked me in the eye and said, good morning. And the other kid looked the other way. Why was she afraid? Why did she choose not to acknowledge presence? Training? She didn't know me, you know. And that's something else that you may want to think about. Where do people come from and how have they been trained to receive strangers? She may well have been taught you just simply don't acknowledge anybody you don't know. But it comes out as a, hey, you know, she's pushing me aside. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I forgot what we were talking about.
That's okay.
Because I keep wandering. I'm sorry.
No, the wanderings are good. That's why we're here.
Okay.
So as far as, you know, treating other people a certain way and acknowledging strangers, is that something you try and ingrain in the children that you work with?
That's difficult with the children because these days you see there are all these unfortunate kinds of relationships that exist out in the world. How do you encourage a child to be open to others? Difficult. I have no real answer for that. Mm-hmm. How do I do that? How do I encourage children to receive perhaps the situation in which they find themselves would be the ones that would, if you're in church, let's say, yes, it's all right. If you're out in the street and this person you don't know, do not acknowledge. Because, and that may be the little girl's response this morning, she does not know. I could have been threatening. How do you encourage children to recognize a threatening situation? Strangers, people who offer them things, pets that are enticing. It is not an easy thing to be a guide to adulthood. There are so many, you know, these, back in my day, these are things that simply would not have existed. The world has changed. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Now, have I blathered enough so that you got the impression I don't know?
Well, I guess I have a question. Why keep teaching after you retire? Like, you know, why keep doing this even after you have said you're going to be done?
Because I have so much to say. Because I'm always put in a position to offer an opinion, mm-hmm. or to offer a suggestion, or to offer a way of thinking about something. The thing I'm doing now, one of the things I'm doing now, I didn't mention this to you, I'm doing a class at one of the local churches, 2 classes as a matter of fact. One on the unexamined life, say I, when quoting Socrates, that the unexamined life is not worth living. This is an outgrowth of a group of classes I've been teaching people about how to tell the world about what you've been doing with your life, stuff like that. And so I now figure, okay, take another look at it. You may have some stuff that you want to be proud of, and they write about it. The other is a class on bling. You may notice that I have an unusual taste as far as stuff is concerned. And I'm helping them to make things that might be interesting in your life. Wall art, for instance, jewelry. And it provides them another creative outlet. We did well enough last year to raise enough money to feed 1,000 people at Second Harvest. So that is another, I suppose, achievement, to be able to, again, cast your bread, you know, one of those things. If it made people happy in doing, and it fed somebody, okay.
So I guess you're teaching people to make jewelry, sort of. You're teaching them to examine their lives, which is sort of a humanities kind of thing. So why is it important to encourage people to study arts and humanities?
Oh, God. Don't you think the world would be a finer place if we had more music in it? Don't you think how civilization can be advanced if we had art more? They take these things away from children and they never realize the consequences. Do you realize how staid the population will be without art or music? This is disgraceful. How can they keep doing things like this? Where are we going when we don't allow our human expressions to be expressed? I'm sorry. I'm not going to apologize for that outburst. I mean it. How dare they take away art and music from people? That really is obscene.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Okay, what else?
Well, because going back to your experiences as a child and what the library did for you, I'm sure that has a huge bearing on how you perceive things like that, like art and music and humanities.
It allowed me to take a deeper look at so many things, because there are I'm trying to think. Van Gogh is my most favorite painter. And to look at Starry Night, for example, and to see the way that he saw those stars. Have you noticed the aurora borealis, which frequently has the same kind of swirling in the atmosphere as he saw? He saw that. He never saw a borealis. Can you imagine? Look at that. Here is this man, hundreds of miles away from the Arctic Circle, who had this kind of vision. Isn't that marvelous? I'm thinking, like I was foolishly quoting Jabberwocky before, and Alice in Wonderland. How dare we not allow that kind of venture into something different, something unusual? This is, how do I want to say this? Quelling of the human spirit. This is regimenting. Not supposed to be. Not supposed to be.
Especially, I think, with the example of Van Gogh, it's almost as if you're saying art is like a way to understand other people and their ways of thinking, which I know you are a big champion of.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Thank you for saying that. I love you.
You're welcome. Well, is there anything else that you would like to...
Haven't I talked enough?
to discuss? Anything you want, people to know for posterity, or anything you'd like to...
No, I have to think about posterity.
All right.
No, thank you so much for taking this time.
Of course. Nothing else you want to say? You're done?
So long. It's been good to know you.
All right. Well, then, on behalf of the Ball State University African American Alumni Oral History Project, I'd like to thank you for participating. It was a pleasure talking to you.
It was a pleasure being talked to. Thank you again.
Thank you.